it was clumsy and it was painful and awkward. It's difficult to learn, and you're going to use it as well. That background I've had in sport has been quite important, actually, because...
Hello, welcome to Space Now, the space news podcast from the National Space Centre, where we go beyond the headlines. However, today we've got a slightly different episode. We're in a different location. This is our pod, the education facility here at the National Space Centre. Usually it's filled with school children learning all sorts of exciting things about space. However, for this episode, it's filled with me, Josh, and also ESA Reserve astronaut John McFall, who joined us for our UK in Space Festival. Now, John is an incredible human being. He unfortunately suffered a rather tragic accident at the age of 19 where he lost half his leg. Now, perhaps for me and maybe some of you at home, that would be the end of the world and you'd struggle to go on to do other things. But not John. He, during his rehabilitation, took up running and actually trained to become a Paralympian, managing to secure a bronze medal in the 100 metres at the 2008 Beijing Paralympic Games. From there, he trained to be an orthopaedic surgeon, excelling in traumatic surgery and helping people get better and recover from life-changing injuries. And if that wasn't enough, he then was selected in 2022 for the European Space Agency's Astronaut programme as part of a programme called Fly. This was a programme designed to see if people with physical disabilities still were able to go to space, what adaptations we might need to make so they can do so, and what training they may need to support them. And amazingly, that programme has come to the conclusion that they can. In fact, with a few small changes and a little bit of additional training, all sorts of people can go to space. And it made, earlier this year, John McFall the very first person with a physical disability to be qualified for flight as an astronaut. So I was really lucky to get the chance to sit down with John to talk all about his astronaut training, what keeps him motivated and pushing for new adventures, and some of the weirder experiments that he'd like to take into space if it was up to him and not the scientists. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with ESA Reserve astronaut John McFall. Well, I'm here with John McFall, who's joined us for the UK in Space Festival. Welcome to the Space Now podcast.
Thank you very much, Josh. Great to be here.
It's lovely to have you. It's your first time here at the National Space Centre, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah, really nice to be here.
Good. We got to have a bit of a look around earlier. Did anything stand out as a favourite artefact or thing you saw?
It's just the history. It's just the history, isn't it? And I think when we went up to the top floor in the...
up in the rocket tower.
In the rocket tower. And I think for me... I'm always hugely humbled by what we have achieved, especially when you look at the schematics of the engines and stuff. And humans have made those. And I am, always like hugely humbled by that. It makes me feel incredibly stupid. I love that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that human story is something that I know we always really enjoy. It's that it's not just a few people either. It's a lot of people that are all, like you say, different areas. People are expert engineers and, master plumbers for the engines, but perhaps haven't got any clue on the material science that goes into the spacesuit. But it's all those people working together.
Absolutely. And it's a huge testament to what we can achieve as humanity. Do you know what I mean? Like we put our minds to it. These amazing problems that we've solved and these technologies that we've mastered and stuff. I love it. It's great.
It is fascinating. It's something I enjoy. And on the subject of wows, one of the things we always like to do on the Space Now podcast is start with a space wow. Now, usually it's something that's fairly recent, so we like to look at the headlines and it's happened, but to avoid putting you too much on the spot, is there anything that particularly wows you about space? It can be something that's happened recently, something you've learned, or just a general space fact.
There's a phenomenal amount that makes me go wow about space. As part of my training, I had to learn. We had a lot of theory about all sorts of stuff. Do you know what? Something that makes my mind boggle: space wows, Lagrange points. They are just phenomenal, right?
Orbital mechanics magic, I think is a good way of describing it.
Magic voodoo, yeah. I think it's all in the same bracket. For me, that is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's for one of those weird concepts, especially when you start to learn about space, that everything's moving really quickly and there's this whole dynamic system to work out, and then they go, except these points where they just sort of stay still and you don't need to worry about it. And it's
I just view them or think of them as eddies in water, like eddies in water. They're like gravitational eddies in space, right? But Yeah, phenomenal. And how the hell did we discover them? It's like, my God, it's
Back to those clever people.
It is, yeah. Again, feel very humbled and very stupid. Again.
Excellent. So I guess a bit about you. You're obviously a Paralympian, a trauma surgeon, and now on the reserve astronaut list. I guess the first question that comes to my mind is, what do you like to do to relax?
What do I like to do? If you get any time to do? No, I do. I get a bit of time to relax. I've got a young family. Mm-hmm. I like to spend time with them. Sport, actually, if I have free time, the first thing I think of when I have free time is, okay, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go for a mountain bike ride, or I'm going to go out on my road bike. And then aside from that, it's like playing the guitar. Mm-hmm. Badly, but I like playing the guitar, and just being with the family, really, doing stuff, family life. Yeah,
sounds nice. Just, I guess, enjoying...
If family life can be relaxing.
Well, most of the time it's okay, I guess, across there. So the Paralympic story is one that's really interesting to me. Me and my mum spend a lot of time watching the Olympics, watching the World Athletic Championships, the Paralympics. It's one of our highlights that always comes round. And in fact, we remember very fondly watching you win your bronze medal back in Beijing. When did you, I guess, get into that as a thing that you could do? It's I always think a big step from... Like you say, you enjoy running and going out there, but when did it sort of start to dawn on you? Actually, I'm not just enjoying this, but I'm pretty good, if maybe the best at this.
Yeah, well, following my accident when I lost my leg, mm-hmm. I got back into sport, and it was all sports. It was hiking, mountain biking, climbing, surfing, and stuff, because I wanted to get back to a life of doing stuff that I did before. That was kind of normal for me. But one of the cornerstones of that, getting back to what I did before. Mm-hmm. I had my accident, was running, because I used to enjoy this such freedom of running, and that was really important for me to regain that independence. Yeah. So I taught myself to run again, just on a normal sort of everyday prosthesis, not one specifically designed for running, and it was clumsy and it was painful and awkward, and I used to break the prosthetic hardware quite a lot because it wasn't designed for that sort of activity.
Sure.
And it was around the time that my prosthetist who made my legs got so fed up with the number of broken prostheses that I was sending him that he agreed to make me a running specific prosthesis. Sure. It was around that time, and then at the same time I had also reached out to an organisation in Wales. It was an organisation called Disability Sport Wales, who I said, listen, I've taught myself to run. I'm an amputee. Are there opportunities for people with disabilities to run competitively? And I have to say, I was pretty ignorant and naive back then about what the opportunities for people like myself were in sport. And they said, oh, listen, come along to one of our training sessions. We'll see you and look at you and let you know whether there's any potential in there. And so I turned up, and I still had my normal everyday running prosthesis. I didn't have a running prosthesis at this time. It was in the pipeline. And so I showed them what I had. I kind of did some sprints up and down the track. And the guy who was the head of performance at Disability Sport Wales at the time, a lovely guy called Anthony Hughes, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, he came over to me and he said, if you do what you're told and you train hard, you will be bloody amazing. And I went, oh. All right.
Yeah, sure.
So that was when, and I was like, okay. So I was sort of taken under their wing, and they were responsible really for getting me to my first competitions. Yeah. So I went to my first international competitions with them in 2004 when I finally got my running prosthesis. Mm-hmm. So this was in 2003 when I first had contact with them. Then in 2004, I went to did my sort of first summer of running with them. Yeah. And did some competitions, and I remember my first race, I was sub 14 seconds, which was already in reasonably good territory for that sort of class of sprinter with this level of amputation, and they were like,
you might have something there.
And that's sort of where it started, really. And then off the back of that, I got selected by British Athletics to compete in my first European Championships, which was in Finland, mm-hmm. which I did in 2005, where I won a bronze medal, I think, I think in the 200 meters maybe, and I think I came fourth in the 100 meters. And at that point, they were like, okay, well, he's got some potential, and they brought me onto the performance program, and I was a lottery-funded athlete from then on.
Excellent. Well, yeah, it's clearly working. And is this something that you still keep up with? Are you still thinking of competing, or is the astronaut training taken over?
Definitely not. No, and I was never, I was never actually a sprinter, if I'm honest. When I was at school, I was more of a middle distance runner. I've always been quick. I always had a really good turn of pace on the sports field. I did sprint hurdles and 200 meters and long jump and stuff, but I'm more suited to middle distance running. But if I wanted to compete as a Paralympic runner, if I wanted to run at a Paralympic level, sprinting was the only thing available to me back then. There weren't the other events available. There weren't the number of amputees populating the longer distance events. So following Beijing, I did not sprint much more, and I went back to
that middle distance,
back to running, and running recreationally. Done a few half marathons, and my standard distance that I go out for is anywhere between 10 and 15 Ks. That sort of stuff keeps me ticking over. Yeah, keeps the dad bod in check, and so.
And I imagine that has given you quite a lot of preparation for, I guess, the astronaut training. How much do you see that overlap of, I guess, that dedication, that having to go out, that constant work? Do you find much of an overlap? Has that been
I do. I think that background I've had in sport has been quite important, actually, because probably one of the reservations that the space agency had about recruiting someone with a physical disability is, right, well, listen, if you're going to go on long duration missions, exercise in space is a big part of that. Yeah. How many people with disabilities exercise 2 hours a day, 6 days a week? Paralympians, right? So from that point of view, maybe it was reassuring for them that I had that background in sports and know my limits as an athlete and my ability to undertake physical exercise. It's tried and tested in me already. It's not something that's new. It's not going to be something that's going to be new for them to explore and potentially be a real source of a problem. Stump health breaking down, for example, would be a real classic one. Someone who goes from just being a recreational exercise.
Yeah, sure.
Someone who does exercise recreationally once or twice a week for a 2-3K jog, going to 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Certainly as an amputee, you can imagine some difficulties with socket fit and stump health and things like that. So
I guess that was, like you say, probably a real benefit to them because it's your expertise. And I think that's, I imagine that's been a large part of your involvement with the Fly initiative and looking at what can astronauts do, what do we need to change. I guess actually coming in with someone like you to say, well, I've done this, I've been living and figuring out this thing and been working it out at a very high level, I guess puts you in a great position to actually work really collaboratively with them rather than them try and solve the issue and get you to the right place.
And they've been able to devolve some responsibility to me in terms of my expertise, but so not just the athlete side of stuff as well, but the fact that my bachelor's degree and my master's was sports and exercise science and biomechanics. I know about human performance and stuff, and then medicine as well. I know about health. I know about bones. I know about skin. I know about the human body. So I think I was able to use a lot of that experience to help to help us do the feasibility study. It was really, really beneficial that I could guide them rather than them having to start from scratch with someone who didn't have any of that experience potentially. So it's been really, really useful.
Yeah, I know it's been really fascinating for us on the outside watching back. And I remember when the announcements were made that this feasibility study was going to be done, and we, following that story, were really interested to see what was happening. And great to see the news came out that actually, this seems like it's fine. There are adjustments that we can make. During that study, was there anything that surprised you that was either really easy or much, much more difficult than perhaps you'd expected? I assume you went in with some preconceptions of, these things are going to be tricky and these should be fairly easy. Was there anything that came as a real shock to you and the team during that study that was a surprise?
Do you know what, Josh? Not really.
That's reassuring,
which is, and I've reflected on this a little bit as well. So there was nothing that was particularly difficult, and I think really this is a reflection of not how difficult it is for someone with a physical disability to become an astronaut, but it's more that we didn't have the evidence beforehand, right? And I started and people got to know me, and we spoke about my background and my experiences and what I'm capable of. I imparted my knowledge and stuff, and I think it gave people confidence that, well, we don't see any reason why you can't do this because you're fit, you understand and everything, that and blah blah blah. And actually, it became more a process of providing the evidence, demonstrating and collating and demonstrating the evidence that it is possible, rather than actually doing something that was incredibly difficult and proving that I was capable of doing something very difficult. It's a little bit like, buying something off Amazon, right? When was the last time you bought something that had a 0-star rating off Amazon?
Yeah, you want that confidence.
You want that confidence.
Okay.
So, and we had to basically get that 5-star rating to demonstrate, which is what the feasibility study was about.
Sure, yeah.
I don't think there was much doubt that I would be able to reach or meet all the requirements. It was just a question, okay, well, how are we going to do it? And we've got to document it and provide the evidence that we've done it.
Yeah, and I think that was something that we reflected on. It was like, well, actually, yeah, you're floating around in 0G. If you've got mobility issues, it's probably not actually as big an issue as it is down here on the Earth. And some of those things, like you say, might be a little bit obvious, but actually, when we're dealing with space or high-pressure environments, knowing that it's going to be fine, having tested and demonstrating it is really important. So, yeah, we were really, really pleased to see that that's all gone through, and I'm sure you were as well. And I'm sure, over the last few years of astronaut training, now sort of moving into that next step has been a really interesting journey for you as well. How has that been going? You've just finished basic training, is that right?
Well, training finished. I say training. You're always
first
stage, training.
Yeah.
Well, the feasibility study.
Yeah.
So the feasibility study that we did finished at the end of last year, and we published the report at the beginning of this year. And that was the signal really for us to move into the next phase, which is what we've called mission ready. So whilst the feasibility study has demonstrated that it's technically feasible for someone with my disability to live and work in space on a long duration mission, now what we want to do is create the conditions that, should a mission become available, that I am assignable to such a mission. And there are a few other things that we needed to do in order to achieve that. One of which was getting medically certified by all the international partners for the International Space Station. So the International Space Station has 5 partners, so Canada, Japan, Russia, US and Europe. Yep. And every astronaut who flies to the International Space Station, whether it's for a short duration mission or a long duration mission, there is a medical board that has to certify them medically to fly. And what's been really interesting is that no one with a physical disability has ever been medically certified to fly on any sort of mission to the International Space Station, let alone a long duration mission. And because of the success of the feasibility study, because it was so exhaustive and methodical and comprehensive, we were able to take this evidence to the International Partners Medical Board, what's called the Multilateral Space Medicine Board, and request medical certification for me, which they found very difficult to not give because of the evidence that we had provided. And I have to say that as well, not that they didn't want to give it, they asked all the right questions, and they have been incredibly supportive of it and embraced it hugely. And this is a world first. This is the first time in the world that anyone with a physical disability has been medically signed off to fly to the International Space Station. And it just shows you the direction that we are willing to go in human space exploration, not just in Europe, but actually as international partners in the space station as well.
I think that's really important as well. I think that international collaboration, I think it's really good to hear, especially in, the modern world, we're constantly looking at geopolitics and the dramas around that can sometimes rise. And I think it's always really nice to reflect. And I think that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about space, is that it's so collaborative. And actually, for the most part, even when things are going a bit awry down here on the ground, often the space agencies, organisations do come together a little bit more, and I think recognise that this has to be something we all do together. It's not something that we can go off and really do on our own anymore. So yeah, I think that's really good to hear.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that international side of things, I guess you've had the opportunity to interact with many of the European partners and the crew. Do you get a chance during training to interact with many of the international crews as well? Has that been an interesting experience for you?
It's great being based at EAC at the European Astronaut Centre in Cologne, because there it is the centre for astronaut training, and that's not just European astronauts, right? So anyone who goes to the International Space Station comes to the European Astronaut Centre to be trained on the Columbus. So Columbus module is Europe's orbiting laboratory attached to the International Space Station. So all astronauts have to come to EAC and train on Columbus. And it's great because you bump into them. And I've met Dom Pettit and Anne McLean and Josh Kurtik, loads of people, and it's really, really nice to see these people coming through. And I've also spent some time over at JSC as well in Houston, Johnson Space Center in Houston, and met quite a few guys over there. So it's great.
Excellent. No, it's good fun. I know we've had the opportunity to meet people here as well. And in terms of training, I remember when we had Tim Peake visit after his flight, and we were obviously chatting with him, and he was talking about actually the language and learning the Russian was the bit of the training that he found the hardest, which I guess on that international note is interesting. Is there anything particular that stood out in your training that you rue those lessons when they come up, or any particular elements that you find really challenging?
Yeah, I think because Russian is quite daunting, because you will use it, right? Whilst I may have been hugely daunted by the kind of PhD level aeronautics and aeronautical engineering that I had to
yeah, I guess it's not just can you show me to the cinema like I learned back in GCSE German or whatever it was.
No, so like I mean, we're doing kind of like pretty high, advanced, for me anyway, pretty advanced sort of, we're having quite advanced classes in aerodynamics and stuff like that. But realistically, I'm not an engineer, and I'm not going to have to implement those equations that I'm looking at blankly.
Yeah, I guess they want you to have an idea of what it's about.
So I find that quite daunting. The subject quite daunting, but I know that I'm never going to have to use it. Whereas Russian is difficult to learn, and you're going to use it as well. But I actually really enjoyed learning Russian. It was really, really interesting to understand how the language is constructed. It's quite a logical and methodical language, but it is hard. And I second Tim's experience. It is damn hard.
Yeah, I think I remember him also saying that it was always another thing that he found challenging was everyone always reminded him that there was one important thing of the mission, that if you ever, if you forgot everything else, remember this one element. And he said that was great, except it was every person he spoke to had the one element that you had to remember. So I'm sure as you prepare for any upcoming missions, you'll have that challenge to deal with as well. Are there any particular areas of space or mission types or experiments that you would like to get the opportunity to do up in space? Have you sort of, as you've explored this world of what an astronaut entails, we hear of the hundreds of experiments that are done on the space station. Obviously you have a medical background, there's a large amount of those experiments. Are there any particular areas that you think, oh, that's a really cool idea or a cool study I'd like to be involved in? Yeah,
there's a couple that I've maybe not necessarily want to be involved in, but there's a couple of experiments that I find really interesting from a science point of view. One is looking at, it's a material science experiment, and it's an experiment that's in Columbus. It's one of the experiments on Columbus, and it's a European experiment. It's called the electromagnetic levitator.
I mean, it sounds very cool.
I could just drop the mic there, right? Electromagnetic levitator, boom. It's so cool just from the name itself. But it's really interesting because what it's trying to do is trying to understand how materials are affected by microgravity, so the lack of gravity. And this is an experiment where you melt metal. Okay. But because it's surrounded by an electromagnetic field, so it's suspended in this electromagnetic field, it's levitating.
And that's on top of the microgravity environment as well.
So it's in microgravity, exactly. So it's suspended in a microgravity environment, in a magnetic field, not touching anything, so it's completely free floating. And what's really interesting is you melt it, and all the molecules and the atoms go and play and slide around each other, and then it solidifies, and it's captured by video as well.
Okay.
So you're looking at the process of solidification. And there are two things that happen in microgravity and in the EML that don't happen on Earth. One is there is no container that the sample is held in.
Okay, yeah.
So you don't get this thing called nucleation, which is where often on Earth, the container that your molten metal is held in tends to be a focus for the molten metal going from a liquid into a solid, what we call crystallization, forming these kind of crystal lattices. And that has an influence on how it then propagates through the rest of the material.
Yeah, because they can perhaps form more centrally or...
Yeah, or eccentrically, actually.
I guess, yeah.
It's off to one side. It's sort of, there will be some impurity or something causing this solidification. So that's another thing. But also what happens in gravity is the molten metal turns into crystalline metal.
And I guess that moves towards the bottom.
Yeah,
and I guess
the bigger crystals, they start to sink, and so you kind of get this uneven crystal-sized structure in metal. So if you have a big ingot of metal, a big piece of solid metal, it's asymmetrical. It's not uniform throughout. And what's really interesting is in microgravity, this is completely without those two influences. So it's just the attraction of the molecules and the atoms between each other, the charges that lead to the formation of the crystal. And you get this thing called dendritic crystal formation. And the quality of the material is superior. And we know this actually as well from the quality of fiber optic cables, which have been made in microgravity. They're like 70 times more efficient than fiber optic cables made on Earth. Don't quote me on that number. I might be completely wrong.
No, it's on video now.
There was a 7 in there somewhere, and it was an order of magnitude, 7 something. Anyway, but they were better. So that's one. The other one is actually something that's more in my field, which is orthopedics and stuff. And what's interesting is when you go into microgravity, you don't load your bones as much.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Bones love load. Right, they live for load, and they rely on load to turn over and to stay strong. You go into space, you offload them, and they start to behave as if you were lying in bed for weeks. And actually, what this does is at a in vitro level, so at an experimental level, we can use this as an accelerated model of osteoporosis. So this is bone thinning, so loss of bone density, which is a huge problem on Earth. And you know, the older populations, as an orthopaedic surgeon, the number of hip replacements I've done in patients who've broken their hips because they are
exactly the same process,
osteoporotic. Yeah. And actually, there's some really, really interesting science being done about how can we slow down or reverse osteoporosis. So you've got this accelerated model in microgravity of osteoporosis, and they've done an experiment using I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit technical now, but like recumbent irisin. There's a protein in us called irisin, which has been identified as being responsible for keeping bones happy. Basically, the cells that like to make bone, irisin helps them, and basically by encouraging irisin or having this recumbent irisin in these samples in space, we've sort of reversed osteoporosis.
Oh, wow.
And even though it's suspended in microgravity, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and I guess if you can do it in space, then it's going to have benefits down here on Earth where those effects aren't quite.
And this is what the microgravity environment provides: is this platform to have this model of osteoporosis that we can do work on, because it's very difficult to do that on Earth, to have the same sort of model and have the control groups, right? Sorry, I went off on a bit technical there.
That's what we like, and I think being able to hear someone that can talk passionately about the things that they enjoy, I think is really useful. And I think it also demonstrates just how useful space is. I think that's one of the things that we're really passionate about. The Space Centre is actually, space is really cool.
Space for Earth.
And rockets. Space for Earth is
super important. Yeah,
and it's super useful. So I think it's really nice to see that, and I think it also reminds us of how useful these things are. I know many people, listeners at home that have been following, have perhaps heard of over the recent years of things like the ISS starting to wind down and maybe looking at other options. But I think it's always important to remind ourselves this is what it's doing. these are the benefits it can have, and not just for pushing us further out into space, but also for improving our lives down here. So it's always interesting to see what missions are coming up. Are there any particular missions that you've got your eye on that you're very excited about? Obviously, we've got things like the Artemis missions to the moon coming up. We've got missions to deep and distant planets and probes.
There's the human space explorations. There's so much going on, to be fair. The human space exploration stuff always I find very exciting. But another ESA mission, which is Vigil, which is due, I think, 2031. This goes back to my love of Lagrange points. But Vigil is going to be in Lagrange point 5, Earth-Sun Lagrange 5. And this is going to be, again, space for Earth. This is going to be looking at solar weather. And predicting solar weather. So it's like a solar weather early warning system, which is quite exciting because, again, from a telecommunications point of view, from a satellite's point of view, what we require on Earth for stuff to work can be hugely affected by sun weather or solar weather. So
I know we're constantly worried that something might knock all of our satellites out. We all see the beautiful northern lights, and people don't realise that actually this is disguising quite a potentially dangerous process that could have large scale implications. But
there's loads of stuff like Euclid is really cool. As well, trying to answer some stuff in the universe. Hera as well, off the back of DART, is going to be quite interesting when Hera is going back out to the asteroids. And we're going to see what the impact of that was. So I think that'll be in a couple of years. We'll know a bit more. But there's loads of cool stuff.
There's far too much that's exciting, but it's good to see. Now, one of the other things that we really like to do here on the podcast is give ways that people can engage with science, so getting involved in projects and things like that. And I believe you're involved in the European Space Agency's Mission X program, and I think that sounds something that's right up the streets of the people that listen to our podcast. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about Mission X and how they can get involved.
Yeah, Mission X is a huge initiative for, I think it's up to about the age of 16 or so. I think so, yeah. And there are many different facets of it. The particular one that I was involved with was around exercise, actually, and it was Mission X Train Like an Astronaut. So I did some filming with some kids. So if you go onto the Mission X platform and look at Train Like an Astronaut, you can see what sort of exercises and activities. So it's not just running and jumping and that sort of stuff. It's actually manual skills and hand-eye coordination and doing tasks with space gloves on for dexterity and things like that. So that's one aspect of it. But there are lots of STEM-related activities on the Mission X platform that is designed, as you say, to encourage people to get involved in space exploration, in space in general, and in STEM.
Yeah, it should be a good program. So there's all sorts of things like that are great. So I think we're coming towards the end of our podcast here. So I guess to wrap up with, we've got listeners at home. Is there perhaps any message that you'd like to give to them? Something to keep an eye out for, or something you'd like to share with people that are listening at home?
I think probably the most important thing I would like to say to people listening is, no matter what it is that you do or what you want to go on and do something that interests you. Do something that you're passionate about, because that will keep the fire burning throughout your life, throughout your career. But also you might find something else interesting later on in life. That doesn't mean you can't then go on and pursue that as well. But find something that makes you want to get up out of bed every day in the morning to go and do, and you will be passionate about it and go and enjoy it.
I think I completely agree. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, John. And enjoy the rest of your day here at the UK Space Festival.
Thanks ever so much, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. Best of luck in the future. We look forward to seeing your journeys into space.
Cheers.
Thank you. Wasn't that fantastic? It was such a great opportunity to sit down with John. He's such an interesting person, not only because of the amazing things that he wants to do and that drive for bigger and better and the next step of his adventure, but he's also a really relaxed and fun person to hang out with. I was really lucky to get to spend all day with him, so not just the conversation that you've just witnessed, but I was sort of his guide around the National Space Centre. We got a chance to explore the galleries and see some of the things that he was up to. He was pointing out artefacts and bits and and pieces from other astronauts he knows. He texted Tim Peake a picture of his spacesuit, for example, while he was there. But we also got a really good chance to chat and find out what he enjoys. We got to work with a bunch of school children that were here for the day, and it was really awesome to see just how passionate John is for space, adventure, and motivating people to do exciting things. Now, there's plenty more John content if you want to find out a little bit more. So during his visit to us in the UK in Space Conference, he actually gave a keynote lecture where he went a little bit more detailed into his life story and some of the things that he's been up to. You'll find that on our YouTube channel, so check out the previous videos and do have a little watch. In terms of the podcast, we're coming back in 2 weeks' time with a long-awaited mailbag episode. We always love getting all your questions about things we've talked about, things we haven't talked about, and just general space queries that you want to answer. So send them in, ready for that episode. The email is podcasts@spacecentre.co.uk. Send us in your questions and tune in for the next episode of Space Now.